Why do sit-ups? Because you want pelvic peace, you don't want war in the Middle East.
That's the way it is.
Pelvic neutrality. You want your pelvis to be as even as the lines on the Swiss flag. To make sure that your pelvis isn't tilting forward or backward, you need stability in your Middle East. Think Simian core, not a Syrian war.
I let it go back to when we played as kids today.
And if your waistband's angled like an alpine ski jump, it's your abs that are going to make your crotch as flat as the Dutch. Now remember when I said 20% plus and you're not going to see any difference from sit-ups, but it's more than just aesthetic, it's the move you need to do so your core is copacetic. 1. The abdominals correct the pelvis so you don't get back pain. 2. The low ab provides a stable base for hip flexion. Without the stable base, the hip flexors won't stretch because they're trying to do the stabilization. So now all that stretching you're doing is pretty much useless. And when you get stressed and your psoas shortens down, you're not going to be able to stretch it back out again. If you're up at this end of the spectrum like an athlete, it affects your hip hyperextension. If you're at this end and you're sedentary, it causes back pain. The psoas gets shorter and tighter, and that makes you more stressed. And then your back hurts more, which makes you even more stressed. It's a vicious cycle, and all because you didn't work your abs. Now yeah, if you're overweight, it is harder to activate the muscles, and the range of movement isn't as good because, well, there's stuff in the way. But that's all the more reason to do it. If you've got gastrointestinal issues, food intolerances, stomach bugs,
what did we eat? It's coming out of me like lava!
or organ troubles, all of these can turn the abdominals off. The flexion movement can keep the abdominals turned on. Also, if you are overweight, the fat acts like cladding, pulling on the abdominal muscles, lengthening and weakening them, and leaving you with an anterior tilted pelvis. Now here's where my view differs from pretty much everybody else's. The low ab flexion activates the upper quads, which is part of the hip flexors, and this generally is seen as a bad thing, except I think it's not. It seems to me that a lot of people have what I would call upper quad insufficiency. I don't even know if that's a term, whether I made it up. I'll Google it. Yep, I made it up. Effectively, the low ab is so weak that the upper quad atrophies because it can't do the forceful contractions that it needs because there's no stable base provided from the low ab. Call that another vicious cycle. Now this is an issue when you do a lot of squats and lunges because if the upper quad can't activate enough, then the strain travels down to the lower quad, which ends up hurting the knee. You know when you get that knee pain straight down the middle of your kneecap. The answer, watch Avenger Low Ab. Oh, the payback. Just palming it off Beat It style to other videos. Now this is the bit that's interesting compared to the twist. Remember, the twist was a pyramid-shaped Rubik's Cube with a fixed base. Flexion is structurally the same. It's a spectrum, most at the top, least at the bottom, but functionally, it works on a completely different concept. It's all and only about balance back to front. So if you're out of balance in your cervicals, your thoracics or your lumbars, you need to do the opposite movement in order to rehabilitate it. If your pelvis tips forward, then you've got to train, well, you don't have to train, I mean, do whatever you want, but I reckon that you need to train spinal flexion movements to rebalance it. Now once you've functionally done that and you've rebalanced it, you can definitely try and then hold the status quo with just isometrics. Now with the T-spine, yeah, functionally you want to keep thoracic flexion equal to thoracic extension. But let's not kid around here. We live in a world of computers and driving, so there's a bigger stimulus on thoracic flexion already, so you need to do more thoracic extension to offset that. In my opinion and experience, if you're out of balance in one direction, you need a bigger and opposite stimulus to pull you back into the middle. That's why I think that the lower lumbars need more lumbar flexion to offset a population that is predominantly more anteriorly tilted in their pelvis. Remember, those ant tilts are coming from a spectrum of overweight bellies and inactivity on one side to sports crammed with bend, squat and lunge and gait patterns on the other. And if half the population are women, and most of them are going to have babies, and therefore they're going to have a 9-month stimulus for an anterior tilted pelvis, it doesn't leave a lot of people who aren't in those groups. I know this is against the back Bible, but if the pelvis is tilted either forward or back and is causing back pain, the way to undo that is to either use spinal flexion or spinal extension to re-neutralize it. If your pelvis is tilted forward, then relatively your lumbars are in too much extension. Therefore, you need to do controlled spinal flexion to re-neutralize that. If your pelvis is tilted back, then relatively your lumbars are in too much flexion. Therefore, you need to do controlled spinal extension to re-neutralize that. Once you've rebalanced it, then, if you're worried about spinal flexion and extension going forward, just use isometrics. But personally, I think a little bit of them at body weight can be a good thing. Now, for an anterior pelvic tilt, there are 8 different secret agents, 000 to 007 for flexion, that keep you at DEFCON 5 and in a peace state. And if you don't have these 00s in your training program, you're risking your national security. You could very well end up at DEFCON 1 in a core war you can't win. Here's general rules with the general rule. Push your low back into the floor, pull your belly button into your spine, and breathe out when you contract. And from now on, when you see ab exercises around, just work out where they are on the framework. That'll help you understand what they're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve with them. Setting up a peace treaty in your Middle East isn't a pipe dream. It's just about understanding the need for balance and not letting the big outside interests like food and muscle imbalances corrupt it.
Yeah!
Or the smaller stuff like, superpowers, oils, natural gas. Yeah, there's probably a fart joke in there somewhere.
Oh my God!
Oh, good God, that's wretched.
So that's flexion. Super important if you want to be able to control your hips while you're hip hinging. My last stop before we finally get to bend is lateral flexion, which I'll do in my next video. Just to warn you, we're going in search of Bigfoot. But in the meantime, crunch forward, hit the like button, have your say in the comments, babe. And if you like my vibe, please subscribe.